If you've ever been the one person in a room telling a truth nobody wants to hear, you know what it feels like to be alone. Me. Now imagine that room is your own family. Imagine they don't just ignore the truth, they try to destroy you for speaking it. They call you a liar, a failure, an outcast. They turn your friends against you, lock you out of your home and drain your bank account, all to protect a lie. For a long time, that was my reality. My name is Caleb, and I was the black sheep of the Hendricks family, a title I earned the day I decided my conscience was worth more than their dirty money. They thought they had crushed me, that they had silenced the one voice of dissent. They were wrong. They thought they were fighting one broken son. What they didn't know was that a second front was about to open, and this war was going to be won with a weapon they never saw coming. A shoebox full of their own secrets, delivered by the one person they wronged almost as much as me. This is the story of how my brother's ex-wife and I dismantled a corrupt family empire, piece by piece, and took back everything they ever stole from us. And trust me, you're going to want to hear how it ends. It all started, as most family tragedies do, with money. My family's business, Hendricks & Sons Construction, wasn't just a company, it was a kingdom, and my father, Marcus Hendricks, ruled it with an iron fist wrapped in a velvet glove. To the outside world, we were a pillar of the community. We built hospitals, schools, and shiny downtown office buildings. The Hendricks name was on charity plaques and political donation lists. We were old money, new success, and a testament to the American dream. But inside the castle walls, the dream was a carefully constructed illusion. I grew up in the business. It was my daycare, my summer job, and my inheritance. My brother Julian was the heir apparent. He had the charisma, the easy smile, and a complete lack of a moral compass, which, in my father's eyes, made him the perfect successor. I was the quiet one, the numbers guy. I was the one who went to college and got a degree in forensic accounting, a skill my father found both useful and faintly suspicious. He made me the company's chief financial officer, not because he trusted my judgment, but because he believed keeping the dirty laundry in-house was the safest bet. For years I did my job. I balanced the books, managed payroll, and looked the other way. I told myself the small discrepancies were just the cost of doing business. A facilitation fee here, an expedited permit there. Every family has its secrets, right? Mine just had a ledger. The real rot started to show about 3 years ago. We were working on a major municipal project, a new pediatric wing for the city hospital. It was our flagship project, the one that was supposed to cement the Hendricks legacy for another generation. I was reviewing the material invoices one night, long after everyone else had gone home. The numbers weren't just fudged, they were fictional. We were billing the city for premium, reinforced steel, but the purchase orders I was cross-referencing were for a cheaper, lower-grade alloy, from an overseas supplier, known for cutting corners. It wasn't just a few $1,000s, it was millions. We weren't just padding the bill, we were building a hospital for sick children, with substandard materials. A cold dread washed over me. This wasn't just about money anymore, this was about lives. I spent the next 2 weeks digging. I worked from home, telling my father I had the flu, while I tore through years of digital records, cross-referencing project bids with supplier manifests, and shell company payment logs. It was worse than I could have imagined. It was systemic. The hospital was just the tip of the iceberg. There were fire safety systems in low-income housing developments, built with faulty wiring, foundations for schools, poured with watered-down concrete. My father and my brother weren't just businessmen, they were criminals, gambling with public safety for profit. The confrontation was quiet, almost clinical. I scheduled a meeting with my father in his ostentatious office, the one with the mahogany desk, the size of a small car, and a window overlooking the city. He was slowly poisoning. I laid out 3 files on his desk. Each one detailed a different project, showing the fraudulent billing, the subpar materials, and the kickbacks paid to a city inspector. I didn't raise my voice. I just presented the facts, as I knew them. My father didn't even look at the files. He just leaned back in his leather chair, steepling his fingers, and looked at me with a tired, disappointed expression, the one he used to use when I'd scraped my knee as a child. He said, "Caleb, there are 2 kinds of people in this world, people who build things, and people who tear them down. We are builders. This is what it takes to build. He spoke about providing jobs, about the complexities of a competitive market, about the greater good. It was the most eloquent defense of corruption I had ever heard. He wasn't even denying it. He was justifying it. I told him it was wrong, that it was dangerous, and that it had to stop. I told him we had to pull the crews, report the material failures ourselves, and make it right. That's when the velvet came off the glove. His eyes went hard. He stood up and leaned over the desk, his voice a low growl. This family, this company, has provided you with everything you've ever had. It put a roof over your head, and paid for that fancy education you're trying to use against me. You are a part of this, whether you like it or not. He gave me an ultimatum. I could either shred the files, forget everything I'd found, and continue to be a loyal son, or I could walk out of that office and never come back. He said, in this family, you are either with us, or you are against us. There is no middle ground. I looked at the man I had spent my whole life trying to please, and for the first time, I saw him for what he really was, a fraud. I stood up, pushed the files towards him, and said, then I guess I'm against you. I walked out of that office, out of the building, and out of the life I had always known. The next morning, I delivered a copy of my findings to the State Attorney General's office. I had officially blown the whistle. I had chosen my side, and I had just declared war on my own family. The retaliation was swift and brutal. It was like a switch had been flipped. The family that had preached unwavering loyalty above all else closed ranks with breathtaking speed, and I was on the outside. The first salvo came from my mother, Brenda. She called me, her voice choked with what I initially thought was sadness, but soon realized was a carefully rehearsed, theatrical rage. How could you do this to your father, to your brother, to us? She accused me of being jealous of Julian, of being an ungrateful child trying to tear down what my father had built. Every argument was an emotional appeal, a guilt trip designed to make me feel like the villain. When I tried to explain the danger, the faulty materials, she just talked over me. Your father is a good man, Caleb. You've been brainwashed by your own bitterness. It was the first time I realized they weren't just disagreeing with me. They had already constructed an alternate reality, where I was the sole antagonist. The family meeting was the public execution. My father summoned me to the family home, the sprawling mansion where I grew up. It wasn't a discussion, it was a tribunal. Marcus sat at the head of the dining room table, a grim-faced judge. My mother sat to his right, dabbing her eyes with a tissue, and Julian, my brother, sat opposite me, leaning back in his chair with a smirk that never left his face. He looked like a vulture, who knew a fresh meal was about to be served. My father laid out the terms of my excommunication. I was to have no further contact with any member of the family. My access to the family trust, which contained my life savings, and a small inheritance from my grandmother, was being frozen pending a review of my hostile actions. I was to return the car the company owned and vacate the apartment that was leased in the company's name. They were systematically stripping away every part of my life that they had ever touched. The worst part wasn't the financial threats, it was the psychological warfare. My father looked at me, his voice calm and steady, and delivered the killing blow. He said, "We've spoken to our friends, our business partners, the people in this community. We've told them that you've been suffering from some emotional instability, that you had a breakdown after being passed over for promotion, that you fabricated these wild accusations out of spite." They were launching a smear campaign. They were painting me not as a whistleblower, but as a disgruntled, mentally unstable failure. Julian chimed in, his voice dripping with false pity. "It's okay, Caleb. We'll get you help. We just can't have you hurting the family while you're not well." The condescension was suffocating. I looked around the table at the faces of the people who were supposed to love me, and I saw nothing but cold strategic calculation. They weren't just disowning me, they were trying to erase me, to discredit me so thoroughly that no one would ever listen to a word I said. The days that followed were a blur of isolation. The smear campaign was brutally effective. Emails went out, phone calls were made. My phone, which used to buzz constantly with texts from cousins and calls from old friends, went silent. I tried calling my best friend from high school,
a guy whose family had vacationed with ours for 20 years. His voice was distant, awkward. "Hey man, I heard you're going through some stuff. I think it's best if we just give you some space right now." Space, that was the word they all used. It was a polite way of saying, "Your family has declared you radioactive, and I don't want to get caught in the fallout." I lost my job within a week. My boss called me into his office, looking pained. "Caleb, your father and I go way back. I got a call. Look, I have to let you go. We can't have this kind of drama connected to our firm." I was professionally blacklisted. Every door I knocked on was politely but firmly shut in my face. To truly understand the depth of this betrayal, you have to understand the family I came from. I have this one crystal clear memory from when I was about 10 years old. Julian, who was 12, had taken our father's antique pocket watch and lost it while playing in the woods behind our house. When my father discovered it was missing, he went ballistic. He lined us both up in his study, demanding to know who was responsible. I knew Julian had taken it, and he knew I knew. I saw the panic in his eyes. Before I could say a word, Julian pointed a trembling finger at me and said, "Caleb did it." I saw him playing with it. I was so stunned I couldn't even speak. My father turned his wrath on me, grounding me for a month. He didn't ask any questions. He just took his golden boy's word for it. 2 weeks later, I found the watch, tarnished and muddy, near the creek bed. I cleaned it up and put it back on my father's dresser without a word. He never acknowledged it. He never apologized. Julian got away with it, and I learned a valuable lesson in the Hendricks family. The truth didn't matter as much as the narrative, and Julian was always the hero of the story. That dynamic never changed. He was the charming rogue who could do no wrong, and I was the responsible, boring one, the supporting character in his life. I also remembered my father's business lessons. When I was a teenager, working summers at the company, he'd take me to job sites. He'd put his arm around my shoulder and say, "Look son, the world runs on relationships. Sometimes a handshake is more important than a contract. Sometimes you have to be flexible to get the job done." I thought he was teaching me about networking, about being a man of your word. It was only years later, sitting in my CFO office, that I understood what flexible really meant. It meant looking the other way when a safety inspector's niece got a generous scholarship from one of our company's charitable fronts. It meant understanding that the consulting fee paid to a shell corporation was really a kickback for a zoning variance. He wasn't teaching me business, he was grooming me, trying to normalize the corruption so that when I inevitably saw it, I would accept it as the way of the world. The betrayal I felt wasn't just about the lies. It was about the corruption of my own education, the twisting of my own father's lessons. And then there was Veronica. My brother Julian married her in a lavish ceremony that was less a celebration of love and more a merger of assets. Veronica came from a modest family, and she was always a little overwhelmed by the Hendricks clan. She tried so hard to fit in. I remember at their wedding, my mother pulled her aside and spent 10 minutes critiquing her choice of flowers, her makeup, and the cut of her dress, all with a saccharine smile on her face. Julian just laughed it off. "That's just mom," he'd say. "She means well." But I saw the look in Veronica's eyes. She wasn't just being welcomed into a family, she was being evaluated, reshaped, and put on notice. They treated her like a beautiful, but ultimately replaceable accessory for the golden son. Her divorce from Julian, a few years before my own exile, was a quiet, brutal affair. The family lawyers, the best money could buy, painted her as an unstable gold digger. They buried her in paperwork, dragged her through depositions, and Julian, with my father's backing, fought her on every single item. She walked away with next to nothing, her reputation in tatters. At the time I felt a pang of sympathy, but I was still part of the machine. I stayed silent. I thought she had just disappeared, another casualty of my family's relentless march.
Now I was the casualty. I was 2 months behind on rent for my shabby new apartment. I was living on ramen and the dregs of my savings. The investigation I had triggered was moving at a glacial pace, bogged down in bureaucratic red tape. My family's lawyers were stonewalling, claiming I was an unreliable witness with a personal vendetta. Without more evidence, my claims were just that, claims. They were going to get away with it. I sat in my darkened living room, staring at the eviction notice on my coffee table. My phone hadn't rung in days. The silence was a physical weight, pressing down on me. The loneliness was an ache deep in my bones. They had won. They had isolated me, bankrupted me, and broken my spirit. I was done fighting. I picked up my phone, my thumb hovering over the number for a public defender, ready to just give up, and then the screen lit up. An unknown number. I almost ignored it. What was the point? It was probably another debt collector. But something made me answer. I said a weak, "Hello?" A woman's voice, quiet but clear as a bell, came through the speaker. "Caleb?" she asked. My heart skipped a beat. I knew that voice. "Caleb, it's Veronica." A long pause. "I heard you've been having some trouble with the family. I think it's time we talked." Hope is a dangerous thing when you have nothing left to lose. But hearing Veronica's voice on the other end of that line was like a flare in the darkness. It wasn't just that someone was talking to me. It was who was talking to me. Veronica was the only other person I knew who had been chewed up and spit out by the Hendricks family machine. She understood. We agreed to meet at a place that was the antithesis of my family's world. A small, gritty, cash-only diner on the industrial edge of the city. A place where no one wore a tailored suit or had a name to protect. I got there early, nursing a cup of bitter coffee, my nerves frayed. I hadn't seen her since a grim-faced encounter at a family Christmas party, right before she filed for divorce. She had looked thin, haunted. The woman who walked through the door of that diner was someone else entirely. The haunted look was gone, replaced by a steely, focused calm. She wasn't dressed to impress or to fit in. She wore simple jeans, a black leather jacket, and her hair was pulled back in a no-nonsense ponytail. The nervous energy she used to carry was gone, replaced by an aura of quiet, formidable resolve. She had survived, and it had forged her into something new. She slid into the booth opposite me and got straight to the point. "I've been following the news," she said, her voice low. "The smear campaign, the disgruntled failure narrative. It's their standard playbook. They used it on me too." She looked me dead in the eye. "I believe you, Caleb, every word." Just hearing that, after months of being called a liar, was enough to make my throat tighten. She continued. "When I was married to Julian, I saw things. I heard things. He was arrogant. He thought I was just some pretty idiot he could show off at parties. He'd leave documents on his desk. He'd take calls on speakerphone in the car. He'd brag about outsmarting regulators and cutting corners, as if it made him a genius. For the first year, I ignored it. I tried to be the good wife. But then, I started to realize what kind of family I had married into. I knew that when it ended, and I knew it would end, they would try to destroy me. So I started preparing, for my own protection." She reached down and pulled a large, heavy banker's box onto the seat beside her. She slid it across the vinyl booth. It landed with a heavy thud between us. "Payback," she said, a small cold smile playing on her lips. She had been waiting for the right moment. My whistleblowing wasn't just a crisis for the family, it was an opportunity for her. We took the box back to my dingy apartment. For the first time in months, I felt a surge of adrenaline that wasn't fueled by fear. It was a hunter's thrill. We opened the box on my living room floor, and it was like unearthing a pharaoh's tomb of corruption. It was a treasure trove. There were 3 old smartphones, Julian's discarded models. There was a thick stack of printed emails and text message transcripts. There were financial statements from offshore accounts I never even knew existed. And at the bottom, there was a small digital audio recorder. Veronica explained. Julian was careless with his technology. He used a shared family cloud account for backups, and he never changed the password. Even after she left, she had been quietly downloading his data for years. The audio recorder, she'd kept it in her purse. She had hours of recordings from their car rides, conversations where Julian, trying to impress her, would boast about the details of his brilliant schemes. This was where my own secret weapon came into play. My father had seen my forensic accounting degree as a tool for him to control. He never imagined I would use it as a weapon against him. For the next 3 weeks, Veronica and I turned my apartment into a war room. We bought a massive whiteboard and created a timeline. We transcribed every audio file, cross-referencing dates and names. My skills allowed me to see the patterns, to connect the dots in a way Veronica couldn't on her own. A vague comment Julian made about a big win in the Cayman Islands, on an audio recording from 2018, suddenly made sense when I matched it with a series of untraceable wire transfers from a shell corporation I found in the printed bank statements. A text message from my father to Julian that just said, "Did you handle Peterson?" became damning when we found an email from Julian to a subcontractor, a day later, authorizing a suspicious consulting payment to a company owned by Inspector Peterson's brother-in-law. We were unraveling a criminal conspiracy, thread by thread. Veronica's evidence was the raw material. My expertise was the key to refining it into an unbreakable case. She had the what, I had the how. We found the motherlode on one of the old hard drives. It was a complete unredacted copy of the company's shadow ledger. It was the real set of books, the one I had always suspected existed, but could never find. It detailed every bribe, every kickback, every fraudulent invoice for the past decade. Julian had stupidly backed it up to the shared cloud, probably years ago, and forgotten all about it. It was the smoking gun, the Rosetta Stone, of their entire criminal enterprise. We stared at the screen, the numbers glowing in the dark room, and we knew we had them. But having the evidence wasn't enough. My family had wriggled out of trouble before. They had the best lawyers, the deepest pockets, and friends in high places. A frontal assault could get bogged down in court for years, and they could bleed us dry long before a verdict was reached. We needed more than just a case. We needed a strategy. We needed to dismantle their empire so completely, and so quickly, that they would have no time to retaliate. That led us to Miss Davies. We used what little money I had left, supplemented by a fund Veronica had squirreled away, to retain a lawyer. Not just any lawyer. Evelyn Davies was a legend, a former federal prosecutor. She had made a name for herself in private practice by taking on corporate giants and winning. She was sharp, terrifyingly intelligent, and had absolutely zero tolerance for arrogant men who thought they were above the law. She was, in short, the perfect person to take on my father. We met her in her sleek, minimalist office. We didn't just tell her our story, we showed her. We presented her with a fully organized, cross-referenced, and indexed binder of our key evidence. We had charts, timelines, and a summary of charges. I watched her as she went through it, her expression unreadable. She spent nearly an hour in complete silence, just turning the pages. When she was done, she closed the binder, looked up at us, and a slow, dangerous smile spread across her face. "Mr. Hendricks," she said to me, "your family has made two critical errors. First, they committed a staggering amount of felony fraud. Second, and far more stupidly, they underestimated the two people they screwed over the most." She leaned forward. "This isn't just a lawsuit, this is a demolition, and I will be more than happy to provide the wrecking ball." The plan was born in that office. It would be a campaign of 1,000 cuts, a silent takeover designed to bleed them out before they even knew they were wounded, culminating in a final public execution. The game was on. Our strategy, crafted with the precision of a military campaign by Miss Davies, was built on the element of surprise. My family believed they were in a war of attrition, a slow legal battle they were confident they could win by outspending and outlasting me. They expected me to fight them in the courtroom. They never expected an attack on their bank accounts. The first move was subtle, almost petty, but it was designed to be a psychological jab and a test of their defenses. Veronica had discovered that during the chaos of their divorce, Julian had never bothered to remove her name from a joint brokerage account. It wasn't their main account, just a side pot he used for speculative stock plays. According to Veronica, he used it to feel like a maverick investor, separate from the family business. It held just over $80,000. It was chump change to my family, but it was the first domino. Following Miss Davies' legal guidance, Veronica submitted the paperwork to liquidate her 50% share. $40,000 vanished from Julian's play money fund overnight. The reaction was exactly what we'd hoped for. Julian called Veronica, absolutely incandescent with rage.
She put him on speakerphone, with Miss Davies on the line silently listening, and me taking notes. He didn't ask. He accused. "What the hell did you do? You stole my money," he shrieked. Veronica, coached by Davies, remained perfectly calm. "Our money, Julian," she corrected him smoothly. "It was a joint account. I took my half. It's perfectly legal. You should have been more diligent with your paperwork." He then switched tactics, from anger to threats. "You have no idea who you're messing with, Veronica. My father will bury you. I'll sue you for everything you have." He was arrogant, sloppy, and completely unaware that his every word was being documented. This single panicked phone call provided us with a fresh piece of evidence. Julian, a primary subject in a federal investigation, attempting to intimidate a witness. He had walked right into our first tiny trap. He immediately ran to our father. I know this because Julian was and always had been predictable. When he complained, Marcus would have dismissed it as a nuisance, an angry ex-wife lashing out. He would have told Julian to ignore her, to focus on the real problem. Their arrogance was our greatest ally. They saw these as two separate issues, a bitter ex and a disgruntled son. They couldn't conceive that we were working together, that their two biggest problems had formed an alliance. While they were focused on Veronica's minor financial jab, we launched the real silent attack. My time as CFO had given me an intimate, almost encyclopedic knowledge of the company's financial architecture. I knew their strengths, but more importantly, I knew their weaknesses. Hendricks & Sons, like many large construction firms, was built on a mountain of debt. Their operations were fueled by a massive revolving line of credit from a major regional bank. I knew the banker who managed the account, a cautious by-the-book man named Mr. Harrison. I also knew that the loan agreement contained very specific covenants, standard clauses that stated the loan could be called or frozen if the company became the subject of a federal criminal investigation. Miss Davies drafted an anonymous letter. It was a work of art, a masterpiece of professional snitching. It was sent from a post office box in a different state and typed on a generic computer. It was addressed directly to Mr. Harrison, in the bank's risk management division. The letter didn't mention my name or Veronica's. It simply stated that the sender was a concerned industry professional who had reason to believe Hendricks & Sons was engaged in systemic fraud and was about to be investigated by the SEC and the IRS. To prove its credibility, the letter included one specific, irrefutable piece of evidence from our treasure box, a copy of a wire transfer confirmation from the company to the offshore shell corporation, owned by the bribed city inspector. It was just enough to be terrifyingly plausible. It was a seed of doubt planted directly in the heart of their financial support system. We didn't need the bank to pull the loan, not yet. We just needed them to get nervous. And nervous bankers start asking questions. Simultaneously, we deployed another small surgical strike. I knew the company's biggest materials supplier, a company called Northwood Lumber. They provided nearly 70% of the timber for all our residential projects. I also knew my father had bullied them into giving him a generous 90-day credit term. This meant Hendricks & Sons was always operating on Northwood's dime, a huge cash flow advantage. Using a burner phone and a voice modulator, I made a call to the head of accounting at Northwood, a woman I knew to be extremely risk-averse. I posed as a disgruntled employee from my family's bank. I told her, off the record, that Hendricks & Sons had been flagged for financial irregularities, and that their line of credit was under review. I suggested, purely as a friendly tip, that she might want to consider moving them to a cash-on-delivery basis, until things settled down. It was a lie wrapped in a plausible truth, and it worked. 2 days later, a massive shipment of lumber for a new housing development was held at the gate. The Northwood driver had new orders, no payment, no delivery. My brother Julian had to scramble to get a cashier's check cut, sucking up a huge chunk of their liquid cash on hand. The panic started to set in, but it was a quiet, contained panic. They still didn't see the full picture. They saw a series of unfortunate disconnected events, a vengeful ex-wife, a nervous bank, a twitchy supplier. Their public response was to double down on the smear campaign against me. My father gave an interview to a local business journal, lamenting his troubled son who was spreading vicious rumors to hurt the family. He projected an image of a sad, stoic patriarch, besieged by a personal tragedy. It was a brilliant performance, and it was exactly what we wanted. The more they publicly blamed me for spreading rumors, the more foolish and culpable they would look when those rumors were proven to be cold, hard facts. They were busy building my defense while trying to destroy my character. They were so busy fighting the ghost of the disgruntled son, they never even thought to look for the real enemy, who was sitting in a tiny apartment across town, methodically cutting the wires that kept their entire empire running. The phone calls between my father and brother became more frequent, more stressed. Veronica's access to the cloud backups was a gift that kept on giving. We could read their text exchanges in near real time. They were getting squeezed, and they had no idea where the pressure was truly coming from. They were trapped in a room with the walls slowly closing in, and they were too busy yelling at the decoy in the corner to notice the real architects of their doom.
The pressure we applied began to create fractures in the family's once impenetrable facade. The bank, prompted by our anonymous tip, had scheduled a routine review of the Hendricks & Sons credit line. The supplier, Northwood Lumber, was now demanding payment up front for every delivery, strangling their cash flow on a multi-million-dollar subdivision project. These were serious problems, and my father Marcus, a man who thrived on control, was starting to lose it. His solution was to call an emergency meeting of the company's board. This was a rare event. The board was less a governing body, and more of an imperial court. It consisted of my father as chairman, my mother Brenda as secretary, a purely ceremonial role, my brother Julian as president, and two of my father's oldest cronies, Bob and Gary, who had been on his payroll in one form or another for 30 years. They were rubber stamps, loyalists, who owed their comfortable retirements to my father's generosity. But there was one other member, a man they always forgot to consider a real threat, a junior board member named Mr. Peterson. He was the nephew of my father's original business partner, and had inherited his seat after his uncle passed away. Peterson was a quiet, meticulous accountant, a man completely out of place among the back-slapping, cigar-chomping old guard. I knew him from my time at the company. He was always uncomfortable during the meetings, always asking quiet, pointed questions that my father would dismiss with a wave of his hand. Peterson was a man of integrity, trapped in a den of thieves. He was our inside man. The day before the board meeting, I reached out to him. We met in a public park. I didn't show him everything, just enough. I gave him a copy of the fraudulent invoice for the hospital steel and the corresponding purchase order for the cheap alloy. I didn't have to explain what it meant. I saw the look on his face, a mixture of sickness and validation. He had suspected for years that something was wrong, but he never had proof. I told him, "Tomorrow, my father is going to blame the company's problems on me. He's going to say I'm spreading lies. I need you to ask him one question. Where did the steel for the St. Jude's pediatric wing come from?" Peterson just nodded, his jaw tight. The day of the meeting was the beginning of the end for them. Veronica and I were in Miss Davies' office, monitoring the situation from afar. Our plan was in motion. Peterson called me from the bathroom on a break, his voice a tense whisper. "It's a circus," he said. "Marcus is ranting about you, calling you a saboteur. Julian is backing him up, talking about how Veronica is trying to extort him. They're telling the board that all these financial issues are temporary, a coordinated attack by two bitter people." The narrative was holding. The cronies, Bob and Gary, were nodding along, tut-tutting about family drama and disloyal children. They were about to vote on a resolution to officially condemn my actions and authorize legal action against me. Then, Peterson played our card. He went back into the boardroom. According to the transcript he sent me later, he waited for a pause in my father's tirade, and then calmly spoke up. "Marcus," he said, his voice steady, "I understand your frustration with Caleb, but I'm concerned about the bank's review. They're asking about project integrity. For example, can you just clarify for the board the provenance of the structural steel used in the St. Jude's Hospital project?" The room went silent. It was such a specific technical question. It wasn't about family drama. It was about liability. My father was caught completely off guard. He stammered for a moment, then tried to brush it off. "Peterson, that's an operational detail. The engineering team handles that." Of course we use only the best materials. Peterson didn't back down. I'm sure we do, he said politely, but I have the project budget here, and it specifies premium domestic steel. Could you just confirm that's what was installed? Julian, seeing our father falter, jumped in aggressively. What are you implying, Peterson? Are you taking my crazy brother's side? But the damage was done. The question hung in the air. The two cronies, Bob and Gary, who had been comfortably dozing, were now sitting bolt upright. They were old, but they weren't stupid. They knew the difference between family squabbles and felony fraud that could land them all in court. For the first time, someone had questioned the king, and the king didn't have a convincing answer. The power in that room had begun to shift. The monolithic wall of the Hendricks family had just shown its first crack. They were no longer a united front. They were a collection of panicked individuals starting to look for an exit. The family exodus had begun, not with a bang, but with a single perfectly placed question. While the board was still reeling from Peterson's question, the real assault began. The double doors of the boardroom swung open. It wasn't a secretary with coffee, it was Miss Davies, flanked by me and Veronica. We walked in, three silent figures against the backdrop of their panic. The look on my family's faces was a cocktail of pure, unadulterated shock. My father's jaw literally dropped. My mother let out a small gasp and pressed a hand to her chest. Julian shot to his feet, his face turning a blotchy, furious red. What the hell are you doing here? He snarled at me. You're not allowed in this building. Bob and Gary looked like two startled sheep, their eyes darting between us and my father, their loyalty visibly evaporating in real time. I didn't say a word. I just looked at my father, holding his gaze. The mask of the powerful patriarch was gone. In its place was the face of a cornered old man, his eyes wide with fear. Miss Davies walked calmly to the head of the table and placed a single impossibly thick, three-ring binder on the polished mahogany. It landed with a sound like a gavel. "Good afternoon, gentlemen," she said, her voice cutting through the stunned silence. "My name is Evelyn Davies. I represent Mr. Caleb Hendricks, a protected whistleblower under state and federal law. I also represent Miss Veronica Jensen, who is a material witness with extensive corroborating evidence." She gestured to the binder. "This is a courtesy copy of the full evidentiary submission that is, as we speak, being delivered to the Securities and Exchange Commission, the Criminal Investigation Division of the IRS, and the District Attorney's Office." The air went out of the room. It was a physical thing. My father sank back into his chair, his face ashen. The blood had drained from it completely. Julian started yelling, a torrent of abuse and denial. "This is garbage, lies. She's a vindictive liar, and he's a pathetic failure trying to get back at us." My mother started to cry, real tears this time, not the theatrical ones from before. "Caleb, please," she sobbed, turning to me. "Don't do this. Think of the family. Think of what this will do to us." I looked at her, at the woman who had called me unstable and ungrateful, the woman who had helped cut me off from everything I knew, and I felt nothing. The part of me that craved her approval had been carved out months ago. This was the moment I had been waiting for. I finally spoke, and my voice was as calm and cold as I had imagined it would be. I didn't address the board. I addressed my family directly. I looked at Julian. "You called Veronica a liar," I said. "Is audio recording 7B, dated April 14th, where you bragged to her about how you faked the concrete composition reports for the Elm Street School project, a lie? Or the text messages to your lover, where you complain about Dad making you handle the kickback to Inspector Peterson? Are those lies too?" Julian's face went from red to white. He looked like he'd been punched in the stomach. I then turned to my father. "You told the press I was unstable," I said, my voice level. "Does this binder look unstable to you? Does a 400-page fully indexed submission to the SEC seem like the work of a disgruntled failure? You built an empire on lies, and you thought you were so smart that you never considered the people you discarded might be keeping receipts." I let that hang in the air for a moment. Then I delivered the final blow. I looked him right in the eye. "You told me I was either with you or against you. You were right about that. You just never stopped to consider what against you would actually look like. We didn't stay to watch the full meltdown, Miss
Davies simply said, "Your corporate counsel will be hearing from us. I suggest you retain criminal defense attorneys immediately." And then we turned and walked out, leaving them in the ruins of their kingdom. We left them trapped in that room with the truth, a truth so damning and so thoroughly documented that there was no escape. As the doors closed behind us, we could hear the shouting begin, no longer directed at us, but at each other. The united front had shattered. The lions were turning on themselves. Walking down that hallway, with Veronica at my side, I didn't feel rage or even triumph. I felt a profound sense of quiet, a cold, clean clarity. It was the feeling of a heavy weight, one I had been carrying my entire life, finally being lifted. It was over. The war was won. The aftermath was a slow, satisfying demolition, just as Miss Davies had promised. The news broke 2 days after the board meeting. Our submission to the authorities was an earthquake, and the aftershocks rippled through the city. The headlines were brutal. Hendricks and Sons faces federal fraud prob. City launches inquiry into public works corruption. The family name, once a symbol of prestige, became synonymous with disgrace overnight. The bank didn't just freeze their line of credit, they called the entire loan due, citing the criminal investigation clause. It was a multi-million-dollar death blow. Unable to pay their suppliers or make payroll, the company spiraled into bankruptcy within a month. The assets of Hendricks and Sons, the trucks, the heavy machinery, the downtown office building, were all seized and scheduled for liquidation to pay off creditors and the massive government fines. My father and my brother were arrested a week later. The image of them being led from the family mansion in handcuffs was on every local news channel. Their arrogance had completely vanished, replaced by the slack-jawed, hollow-eyed look of men who had lost everything and still couldn't comprehend how. They were charged with dozens of counts of wire fraud, mail fraud, conspiracy, and tax evasion. Faced with the mountain of evidence we had provided, the DA built an ironclad case. Their high-priced lawyers couldn't save them. Julian, in a desperate attempt to save himself, tried to turn on our father, claiming he was only following orders. But the evidence implicated him so directly, the texts, the audio recordings, that his betrayal only served to seal both their fates. They both ended up taking plea deals to avoid a longer sentence, and both are now serving time in federal prison. My mother was left with nothing. The family mansion, the cars, the jewelry. It was all sold off to pay their debts. She moved into a small rented condo. She tried to call me a few times, leaving long rambling voicemails that swung between tearful apologies and bitter accusations. She blamed me. She blamed Veronica. She blamed my father's ambition. She never once took responsibility for her own role in the cover-up, for her own complicity. I never returned her calls. They were the ones who had defined family as a fortress. It was their decision to exile me when I wouldn't defend its rotten foundations. They didn't get to ask to be let back in after they had burned it to the ground. Veronica and I both received substantial rewards from the government's whistleblower program. It was a life-changing amount of money, but it was never about the money. For Veronica, it was about justice. It was about validation after years of being gaslit and dismissed. She used her share to move across the country, starting a new life somewhere quiet and sunny, far from the shadow of the Hendricks name. We still talk occasionally. We're not family, but we're bound by something stronger, a shared victory against a common enemy. As for me, I used my reward to start over, but on my own terms. I founded a small independent consulting firm. I'm a forensic accountant, but a different kind. I'm the guy companies hire when they suspect something is wrong, when they need someone to find the rot before it spreads. I help them build transparent, ethical systems, the very skills my father tried to corrupt. I now use to do the exact opposite. I took his legacy of deceit and inverted it. I'm respected not for my name, but for my integrity. The irony is not lost on me. You see, they taught me that family was about unconditional loyalty, but what they really meant was unconditional obedience to their corruption. They believed their bond was their greatest strength, but it was their fatal flaw. They built their walls so high to protect their secrets, that they couldn't see the threat was already. They thought power came from money, from influence, from a name engraved on a building. They never understood that real power lies in the truth. It can be buried, it can be ignored, it can be silenced for a time, but it never truly goes away. It just waits for its moment, and when that moment comes, it can bring down an empire. So, if you've ever been the black sheep, the lone voice in a crowd of liars, I want you to remember my story. If you've ever been told to just go along with something you knew in your gut was wrong, maybe my experience can be a reminder that your integrity is worth more than their approval. The path of truth is often a lonely one, but you never know who else might be walking it, just waiting for an ally. Let me know what you think in the comments below. Have you ever had to stand up to your own family? I read all the comments, and I'm interested to hear your stories. And if you found this one satisfying, don't forget to like this video, and subscribe to the channel for more stories of justice and vindication. Thanks for listening.